Hi, I'm Joseph Taylor. At my father's funeral, my stepmother didn't shed a single tear. She demanded the estate documents. My stepbrother, Freeman, he moved through the rooms like he already owned them, measuring walls, making calls to realtors before the casket was even closed. Within hours, they announced I'd get nothing. Because the will, or so they claimed, left everything to Cole. The business, the properties, the accounts, all of it. They didn't ask if I knew why. They didn't wait for the notary to finish reading. They just celebrated like I was already erased, like 17 years of my life here meant absolutely nothing. But what if I told you there was a second document they didn't know existed? One my father made sure would only surface if they tried to cut me out. Now the question isn't what I lost, it's what they're about to lose when the hidden clause gets read aloud. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The chapel smelled like forced sympathy and expensive lilies. I stood near the back, away from the front rows where my stepmother Linda Walker sat draped in black silk, her face composed, her eyes dry as desert stone. My stepbrother Freeman stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other checking his phone every 30 seconds like he had somewhere more important to be. My father's casket rested at the center of the room, polished oak with brass handles that caught the dim light filtering through stained glass windows. He'd been gone for 3 days, and already the house felt like it belonged to someone else. Already the air tasted different, sharper, like something had been stripped away and replaced with cold efficiency. I wore a suit that didn't fit quite right. The jacket was tight across the shoulders, the pants a little too short. I'd borrowed it from a friend because I didn't own anything formal enough for this moment. My father used to joke that I looked better in work boots than dress shoes. He was right. I felt like an imposter standing here among people who'd barely spoken to me in years. The service was short, clinical. The pastor spoke in rehearsed phrases about a man he'd never met. Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but I never saw actual tears. Cole nodded solemnly at the appropriate moments, playing the grieving son with Oscar-worthy precision. I said nothing. I just watched, hands folded, jaw tight, trying to hold on to the last memory I had of my father before the hospital took him. 2 weeks ago, he'd called me to his study. His voice had been weak, his hands trembling as he poured himself water from a glass pitcher that used to sit on his desk for decades. He looked smaller somehow, like the illness had carved pieces off him when no one was looking. "Joseph," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I hadn't seen in months. "I need you to trust me. No matter what happens after I'm gone, trust that I saw everything clearly." I didn't understand then. I nodded anyway, promised him I would. He smiled faintly, reached across the desk, and handed me a small brass key on a leather cord. "Keep this safe," he said. "Don't tell anyone you have it. Not Linda. Not Cole. No one." I took it, felt the weight of it in my palm, and slipped it into my pocket without asking questions. Now, standing in this chapel with that same key pressing against my ribs through my shirt, I finally understood. He'd known. He'd known exactly what would happen. After the service ended, people filtered out slowly, shaking hands, offering empty condolences. I stayed behind, lingering near the casket. I wanted one more moment, just one, before they sealed him away forever. That's when Linda approached. She didn't wait for the room to clear. She didn't lower her voice. "Joseph," she said, her tone clipped and businesslike, "we need to discuss the estate." I turned slowly. "Now?" "Yes, now." She folded her arms, her expression hard. "Your father's attorney is waiting at the house. We're reading the will this evening. I assume you'll want to be there." It wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. Cole stepped up beside her, hands in his pockets. That same smug half-smile he'd worn since the day Linda married my father. "Don't worry, Joseph. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Maybe a small trust or something. Dad would have wanted that." I clenched my fists but kept my voice steady. He had a will. Whatever he decided is what stands. Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course. That's why we're reading it tonight, to make everything official." She turned and walked away, heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown. Cole followed, but not before leaning in close enough for only me to hear. "You really think he left you anything?" he whispered. "You weren't even here when he got sick. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who helped him build everything these last 5 years." I didn't respond. I just stood there, fists still clenched, breathing slowly through my nose. When he finally walked away, I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the brass key. "Trust me," my father had said. I did. By evening, I arrived at the house. It sat on the edge of town, a sprawling estate with tall iron gates and a cobblestone driveway that wound through perfectly manicured gardens. The place had been in my father's family for generations, built by his grandfather, with money earned from timber and land development. I'd grown up here, played in these gardens, learned to ride a bike on this driveway. But the moment Linda moved in 7 years ago, everything changed. The warmth disappeared. The laughter stopped. It became a museum, a showpiece, something to display rather than live in. I parked near the garage and walked toward the main entrance. The door was already open. Inside, the foyer was filled with people I barely recognized. Distant relatives, business associates, a few of Linda's friends who'd never spoken to me before. They stood in clusters, whispering, sipping wine, acting like this was a networking event rather than a funeral gathering. I moved through the crowd without speaking, heading straight for the sitting room where the will reading was supposed to take place. The room was large, lined with bookshelves and old portraits of family members I'd only heard about in stories. A long table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs. Linda and Cole were already seated at the head. The attorney, a man named Parker Grant, stood near the window, briefcase in hand, looking uncomfortable. I took a seat at the far end of the table, away from everyone else. A few people trickled in, filling the remaining chairs. No one sat near me. No one acknowledged me. I was a ghost in my own father's house. Parker cleared his throat and set his briefcase on the table. "Let's begin," he said quietly. "I know this is a difficult time, but we need to address the estate according to Mr. Taylor's wishes." Linda leaned forward, fingers laced together on the table. "Please, proceed." Parker opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. "This is the last will and testament of Gregory Allen Taylor, executed on March 14th of this year, and witnessed by 2 independent parties." March 14th. That was only 6 weeks ago, right around the time my father called me into his study. Parker continued. "To my wife, Linda Walker, I leave the residence at 428 Ashford Lane, along with all furnishings, vehicles, and personal effects contained therein." Linda nodded, her expression calm, satisfied. "To my stepson, Cole Freeman, I leave full ownership of Taylor Holdings, including all subsidiaries, partnerships, and associated business assets." Cole smiled, glanced at Linda, then leaned back in his chair like a king claiming his throne. Parker paused. I felt the room shift, the air grow heavier. He looked up from the document, his eyes scanning the faces around the table before finally landing on me. "And to my son, Joseph Taylor," he said slowly, "I leave nothing." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Linda's smile widened just slightly. Cole let out a breath. Almost a laugh. A few people exchanged glances, some awkward, some pitying. I sat there, frozen, hands gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. Parker set the document down. "That concludes the primary will. Are there any questions?" Linda stood immediately. "No questions. I think that's perfectly clear." She looked directly at me. "Joseph, I'm sorry it had to be this way. But your father made his choices. You'll need to vacate the premises within 30 days. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just stared at the table, at the folder, at the man who'd just read words I couldn't believe came from my father. Cole stood too, buttoning his jacket. "We'll help you pack if you need it. No hard feelings, right?" Still, I said nothing. They began to file out, one by one, until only Parker and I remained. He looked at me with something close to sympathy, but he didn't speak. He just gathered his papers, closed his briefcase, and walked toward the door. Before he left, he stopped. "Joseph," he said quietly, not turning around, "your father was a complicated man, but he wasn't careless." Then he left. I sat there alone in that room, surrounded by portraits of ancestors I'd never met, in a house that no longer felt like mine, holding a brass key that suddenly felt like the only thing I had left. Bam Baptiste. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I stayed in my old room on the second floor, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Parker had read. The will didn't make sense. My father and I hadn't been close the last few years. Not since Linda came into the picture, but we'd never been enemies. He'd called me. He'd given me the key. He'd told me to trust him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. So why did the will say I got nothing? By morning, the house was already changing. Cole had movers scheduled. Linda was on the phone with interior designers, talking about renovations, about erasing the old and bringing in the new. I walked downstairs and found them in the kitchen, sipping coffee, laughing about something I hadn't heard. They stopped when they saw me. "Morning, Joseph," Linda said with false sweetness. "Coffee?" "No, thanks." Cole leaned against the counter, mug in hand. If you need help finding a place, I can make some calls. I know a guy who does short-term rentals." I ignored him and walked past, heading toward my father's study. The door was closed but unlocked. I stepped inside and shut it behind me. The room still smelled like him, like old leather and wood smoke, and the faint trace of the cologne he used to wear. His desk sat in the center, covered with papers, folders, a laptop that hadn't been opened in weeks. I moved around it slowly, running my hand along the edge, remembering all the times I'd sat across from him as a young man, listening to him talk about business, about life, about what it meant to build something that lasted. Then I saw it. On the corner of the desk, half hidden under a stack of mail, was a small wooden box. It was old, scratched, unremarkable, but carved into the lid was a single word: Joseph. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I reached for it, pulled it toward me, and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a second key, smaller than the one my father had given me before he died. I unfolded the paper slowly, carefully, and recognized his handwriting immediately. If you're reading this, then they've already read the will. And if they read the will, then they think they've won. Let them think that. Go to the notary's office. Give them both keys. Ask for document 447B. Trust me, son, one more time. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands were shaking. I folded the paper, slipped it into my pocket along with both keys, and stood. Parker had said my father wasn't careless. He was right. I left the study, walked past Linda and Cole without a word, and drove straight into town. The notary's office was a small brick building tucked between a bakery and a law firm, easy to miss if you didn't know where to look. I parked out front and walked inside. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging from a chain, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I need to see the notary. It's about an estate document." She nodded and picked up the phone. A moment later, a man emerged from the back office. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with neatly combed hair and a no-nonsense expression. "I'm Miles Abbott," he said, extending a hand. "You're here about a document?" "Yes, document 447B. His expression shifted slightly. Not shock, but recognition. "Follow me." He led me into a small back room lined with filing cabinets and locked safes. He gestured for me to sit, then moved to one of the safes in the corner. He opened it with a key from his pocket, flipped through several files, and pulled out a sealed envelope marked with my father's name and a date from 2 months ago. "Before I open this," Miles said, sitting across from me, "I need to verify your identity and confirm you have the access keys." I pulled both keys from my pocket and set them on the table. He examined them, nodded, then looked at my ID. Satisfied, he broke the seal on the envelope and pulled out a thick document. He scanned it silently, his eyebrows lifting slightly as he read. Then he looked up at me. "Mr. Taylor, are you aware of what this document contains?" "No." He set it down carefully. "This is a secondary testamentary instrument, filed under private notarization with conditional activation. In simpler terms, it's a hidden clause that overrides the primary will if certain conditions are met." My throat tightened. "What conditions?" "If anyone other than you attempted to claim the entirety of the estate within 14 days of your father's death, this document automatically activates." He paused. "Your stepmother and stepbrother filed transfer paperwork yesterday." I couldn't breathe. Miles continued. According to this document, your father left you full ownership of Taylor Holdings, all liquid assets, and the estate property. Cole Freeman and Linda Walker are entitled to a modest settlement, but nothing more. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table. He knew. I whispered. He knew exactly what they'd do. Miles nodded slowly. Your father was very thorough. He also included a videotaped deposition explaining his reasoning. Would you like to see it? I nodded, unable to speak. Miles pulled out a laptop, opened a video file, and turned the screen toward me. My father's face appeared, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp, clear, full of purpose. Joseph, he began, his voice steady. If you're watching this, then Linda and Cole moved faster than I hoped, but exactly as I expected. I'm sorry you had to go through this. But I needed to know for certain who they really were, and now so do you. He leaned forward slightly. Everything I built for you, not because you asked for it, but because you earned it. You stayed honest when they played games, you worked when they schemed, and you loved me even when I made it hard. That's why you get everything, and that's why they get nothing. The video ended. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my father's words echoing in my head. Miles closed the laptop. I'll need to file this with the probate court immediately. Once I do, the primary will is voided, and this document takes full effect. Do it, I said, my voice hoarse. He nodded. They're going to fight this. Let them. I stood, shook his hand, and walked out of that office a different man than I'd walked in. I didn't go back to the house right away. I couldn't face them yet, not until I had time to process what had just happened. Instead, I drove to the edge of town, to a place my father and I used to go when I was younger. It was an old overlook, perched on a hill with a view of the valley below. We'd come here on weekends, just the two of us, back before Linda, before Cole, before everything got complicated. He'd bring sandwiches and coffee in a thermos, and we'd sit on the hood of his truck, talking about nothing and everything. I parked in the same spot we always used and got out. The air was cool, the sky overcast. I leaned against the hood and looked out at the valley, and suddenly I was 17 again, sitting beside my father, listening to him talk about his own father and what it meant to leave something behind. Legacy isn't about money, Joseph, he'd said. It's about integrity. Anyone can build an empire. Not everyone can build it with clean hands. I'd asked him what he meant. He smiled. Someday you'll understand. I understood now. The memories came flooding back, one after another, sharp and vivid. I remembered the year my mother died. I was 9. My father was devastated, but he didn't fall apart. He held me when I cried, made me breakfast even when he forgot to eat, read to me at night, even though I could read myself. He was everything. Then Linda came into the picture. I was 15. She was polished, charming, attentive in a way that felt rehearsed. My father was lonely, and she knew exactly how to fill that void. Within 6 months, they were married. Within a year, Cole moved in. Cole was 2 years older than me, fresh out of a failed business venture, looking for a reset. My father gave it to him. He brought Cole into Taylor Holdings, trained him, gave him responsibilities, treated him like a son. At first, I didn't mind. I was focused on school, on figuring out my own path. But slowly, things started to shift. Cole began taking credit for projects I'd worked on. Linda began making decisions about the house, about family events, about me, without asking. My father, caught in the middle, tried to keep the peace. But he wasn't blind. I remembered one night, I was 17, maybe 18. I came home late from work at a hardware store where I'd been stocking shelves to save money for college. I walked past the study and heard voices. My father and Linda were arguing. He's your son, Gregory, Linda said, her voice sharp. But he's not driven like Cole. He doesn't have ambition. He has integrity, my father replied. That's worth more. Integrity doesn't build companies. It sustains them. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I went to my room, closed the door, and told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Over the next few years, I watched Cole rise through the company, while I worked odd jobs, paid my own way through community college, kept my head down. I didn't ask my father for anything. I didn't want to be a burden. But he noticed. One night, about 3 years ago, he called me into his study. He was sitting at his desk, papers spread out in front of him, and he looked tired. "Sit down, Joseph," he said quietly. I sat. "I need to tell you something," he began, "and I need you to hear me, really hear me." I nodded. "Linda and Cole, they think I don't see what they're doing. But I do. I've seen it for a long time." He paused. "I've made mistakes. I let them in too easily. I gave them too much, too fast. And I'm sorry you've had to watch that." "Dad, it's fine." "No, it's not." He leaned forward. "You've carried yourself with dignity when you had every reason to be angry. You've worked for everything you have, and I'm proud of you." I didn't know what to say. "I'm going to make this right," he said, "but I need you to be patient. Can you do that?" I nodded. He smiled faintly. "Good. Because when the time comes, you're going to have a choice. You can become like them, or you can become better. I'm betting on better." Sitting on that overlook now, 3 years later, I finally understood what he meant. He hadn't abandoned me, he'd been testing all of us. And when Linda and Cole showed their true colors, he'd made sure the truth would come out. I pulled out my phone and called Miles. "It's Joseph," I said. "File the document. Do it today." "Understood," he replied. "They'll be notified by tomorrow morning." I hung up and stared out at the valley, my father's voice still echoing in my head. Legacy isn't about money, it's about integrity. I was about to find out just how much integrity cost. By the time I returned to the house, it was late afternoon. The sky had darkened with storm clouds, and a cold wind swept through the trees lining the driveway. I parked near the garage and sat in my car for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, preparing myself for what was coming. Miles had filed the document. By tomorrow morning, Linda and Cole would know. The empire they thought they'd inherited would be ripped away, and I'd be standing in the wreckage holding everything they wanted. I got out of the car and walked toward the house. Before I reached the front door, it swung open. Cole stood in the doorway, arms crossed, that familiar smirk on his face. "There he is," he said. "We were wondering where you disappeared to." I didn't respond. I just walked past him into the foyer. Linda was in the sitting room, phone pressed to her ear, her voice clipped and authoritative. When she saw me, she ended the call abruptly. "Joseph," she said, standing, "we need to talk." "About what?" She exchanged a glance with Cole, then turned back to me. "About your living arrangements. We've been generous giving you time, but Cole needs your room for his office. We'll need you out by the end of the week." I stared at her, my jaw tight. "This is still my father's house." "Was?" Cole corrected, stepping into the room. "It was your father's house. Now it's ours." The will was clear. I felt the brass keys in my pocket, felt the weight of what I knew pressing against my ribs. But I said nothing, not yet. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll be out by the end of the week." Linda smiled, satisfied. "Good. I'm glad we can handle this like adults." I turned and walked toward the stairs, heading up to my room. Behind me, I heard Cole laugh softly, heard Linda resume her phone call. They thought they'd won. They thought I was broken. Let them think that. I spent the next few hours packing my things into boxes. Clothes, books, a few personal items I couldn't leave behind. Most of it didn't matter. Most of it was just noise. But there were a few things I couldn't lose. Photos of my mother. A watch my father gave me on my 18th birthday. A letter he'd written me when I graduated, telling me he believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I packed slowly, methodically, listening to the sounds of the house around me. Footsteps in the hallway, voices downstairs, the hum of activity as Linda and Cole began reshaping everything to fit their vision. By evening, I was exhausted. I sat on the edge of my bed, surrounded by half-filled boxes, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through old messages from my father, reading words I'd ignored at the time because I thought I'd have more chances to hear them in person. One message stood out. "You're stronger than you know, Joseph. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I closed my eyes and let the words settle. The next morning, everything changed. I woke to the sound of shouting, loud, angry voices coming from downstairs. I got dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway. The shouting grew louder as I descended the stairs. Linda was in the sitting room, phone in one hand, a document in the other. Her face was red, her voice shaking with fury. "This is impossible," she was saying. "There's no way this is legal." Cole stood beside her, reading over her shoulder, his expression shifting from confusion to rage. I stopped in the doorway, watching. Parker Grant stood near the window, briefcase in hand, his face carefully neutral. He looked up when he saw me. "Joseph," he said quietly, "good morning." Linda spun around, her eyes locking onto mine. "You," she hissed, "you did this." "Did what?" I asked, calmly. "Don't play dumb," Cole snapped. He held up the document Miles had filed. This fake will, this fraud." I stepped into the room. "It's not fake." "Bullshit," Cole said, his voice rising. "You forged this. You manipulated him. You—" "Enough," Parker interrupted, his voice firm. "The document is legitimate. It was filed, notarized, and videotaped. Your father executed it 2 months before his death with full mental clarity." Linda's hands were shaking. "I want a forensic analysis. I want handwriting experts. I want every signature examined." "You're welcome to request that," Parker said, "but I assure you it will confirm what I've already told you." Cole turned to me, his face twisted with anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Sneaking around, playing the victim? But everyone's going to see through this." "See through what?" I asked. "The truth?" "The lie," Linda said coldly, "that you somehow deserve any of this." Parker cleared his throat. "According to the secondary document, Joseph is now the sole owner of Taylor Holdings and the estate property. You're entitled to a settlement of $50,000 each, but all other assets revert to him." 50,000 out of an empire worth millions. Linda's face went pale. Cole looked like he'd been punched. "This isn't over," Linda said, her voice low and dangerous. "We'll fight this. We'll take it to court. We'll prove he coerced your father, manipulated him when he was vulnerable." "You can try," Parker said, "but the video deposition is very clear. Your husband explicitly stated that Joseph earned this, and that you and Cole did not." The room fell silent. Linda turned to me, her eyes filled with something darker than anger. "You're not my family anymore," she said slowly. "You're nothing." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I never was family to you. I was just in the way." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room. Cole followed, but not before stopping in front of me. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "I'll make sure of it." Then he left. Parker stayed behind, gathering his papers. He looked at me with something close to concern. "They're going to come after you," he said. "Legally, publicly, personally. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't have a choice," I said. He nodded. "Your father believed you could handle it." I hope he was right. He left, and I stood alone in the sitting room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that no longer existed. Within hours it started. Cole's first move was social media. He posted a long, emotional statement about how I'd manipulated our dying father, how I'd isolated him in his final weeks, how I'd forged documents to steal an inheritance that wasn't mine. He included old photos of him and my father, smiling, working together, looking like the perfect father-son team. The post went viral. Comments poured in. Strangers who'd never met me called me a thief, a con artist, a disgrace. People shared the post, added their own stories about greedy relatives, tagged news outlets. Within 24 hours, a local news station picked it up. I watched the segment from my room. They interviewed Cole, who played the grieving stepson perfectly. He talked about how much he loved my father, how hard they'd worked together, how devastated he was to see the family torn apart by greed. "I just want justice for the man who gave me everything," Cole said, his voice breaking at exactly the right moment. "They didn't interview me. They didn't ask for my side. They just ran with his story." The next blow came from Linda. She hired a public relations firm, one that specialized in crisis management and reputation destruction. Within days, they'd crafted a narrative. I was the estranged son who returned only when there was money involved. I was unstable, unreliable, possibly dangerous. They dug up everything: an old arrest from when I was 19, a bar fight that got out of hand, a lawsuit from a former employer claiming I'd damaged equipment, even though the case had been dismissed. They twisted every detail, stripped away context, and built a version of me that looked like a villain. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the legal process, on working with Parker and Miles to solidify the estate transfer. But everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. Whispers followed me through grocery stores. Former friends stopped returning my calls. One morning I walked out to my car and found the tires slashed, the windshield cracked, and a note tucked under the wiper. Thieves get what they deserve. I called the police. They took a report, but nothing came of it. No witnesses, no cameras, just another anonymous attack in a growing list. Then, Linda filed a restraining order. She claimed I'd shown up at her new apartment, that I'd threatened her, that she feared for her safety. It was a complete lie, but it didn't matter. The judge granted a temporary order, and suddenly I was legally barred from going within 500 feet of her or Cole. The news picked that up too. Heir accused of threatening stepmother, the headline read. I didn't recognize myself anymore, not in the stories, not in the photos they used, not in the person they were creating. Parker called me one evening, his voice heavy. Joseph, we need to talk strategy. They're not just fighting the will. They're trying to destroy your credibility so thoroughly that even if you win legally, you lose publicly. What do I do? I asked, my voice hollow. You fight back, he said, but carefully. One wrong move, and they'll use it against you. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls close in. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from strangers, threats, accusations. I turned it off and lay there in silence. For the first time since this started, I wondered if my father had been wrong. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I couldn't handle this. But then I remembered his voice from the video. You stayed honest when they played games. I got up, turned my phone back on, and started documenting everything. Every message, every threat, every lie they spread. If they wanted war, I'd give them truth. 3 weeks passed, and I'd lost more than I thought possible. Not just things, but pieces of myself I didn't know could be taken. The legal battle dragged on, slow and brutal. Linda and Cole hired a team of attorneys who specialized in estate litigation, the kind who billed by the minute and treated every hearing like a championship match. They filed motion after motion, challenging the validity of the secondary document, demanding mental health evaluations of my father post-mortem, questioning the notary's credentials, anything to create doubt. Parker fought back, but it was exhausting. Every week brought a new court date, a new deposition, a new stack of paperwork. I spent hours in conference rooms answering the same questions over and over, watching opposing lawyers try to twist my words into confessions of crimes I hadn't committed. Meanwhile, the public campaign against me intensified. Cole appeared on a podcast, one of those true crime shows that dissected family drama for entertainment. He told a version of our story that painted me as a manipulative outsider who'd wormed my way back into my father's life for money. He wasn't there for years, Cole said, his voice dripping with false sadness. Then suddenly, right before Dad got sick, he's back, asking questions, getting access. It's too convenient. The host nodded sympathetically, asked leading questions, let Cole spin his narrative without pushback. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I couldn't. But everyone else did. The episode went viral, racked up millions of downloads, and suddenly I wasn't just a local story anymore. I was a national villain. People I'd never met sent me messages calling me a vulture, a snake, a disgrace to family values. Someone created a fake social media account in my name and posted vile things, forcing me to spend hours trying to get it taken down. My boss at the warehouse where I'd been working part-time called me into his office. Joseph, he said, not meeting my eyes. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to let you go. This situation, it's creating problems. Customers are complaining. Employees are uncomfortable. I haven't done anything wrong, I said. I know, he replied, but perception matters, and right now, the perception is bad. I left that job with a box of my things and no idea how I'd pay rent. The apartment I'd moved into after leaving the estate was small, drafty, and barely affordable even with my warehouse paycheck. Without it, I was sinking fast. I applied everywhere, sent out dozens of resumes, but every employer did the same thing. They Googled my name, saw the headlines, and ghosted me. I started selling things. My laptop, my watch, anything that had value. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, skipped meals when I had to, and watched my savings account drain to nothing. One night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills, and felt something inside me crack. I called Parker. I can't keep doing this, I said, my voice raw. I'm out of money. I'm out of options. Maybe I should just walk away. There was a long pause on the other end. Joseph, he said finally, if you walk away now, they win. Not just the estate, they win the story. They get to tell everyone that you were exactly what they said you were. Is that what you want? I didn't answer. Your father trusted you with this, Parker continued. Not because it would be easy, but because he knew you'd do the right thing even when it cost you everything. It's costing me too much, I whispered. I know, he said quietly. But we're close. The judge is reviewing everything. The video deposition is powerful. The notary confirmed every detail. We're going to win this, Joseph. You just have to hold on a little longer. I hung up and sat there in the dark, my father's words echoing in my head. Legacy isn't about money, it's about integrity. The next morning, I woke up to a knock on my door. I opened it to find a process server holding another envelope. Joseph Taylor? He asked. Yeah. He handed me the envelope. You've been served. I closed the door and opened it. Inside was a lawsuit. Linda and Cole were suing me personally for emotional distress, defamation, and elder abuse. They were seeking damages in the amount of $5 million. I read it twice, then a third time, my hands shaking. They weren't just trying to take the estate, they were trying to bury me completely. I called Parker. He'd already heard. This is an intimidation tactic, he said. They know they're losing the estate case, so they're trying to break you financially and emotionally. It's working, I said. Don't let it, he replied. We'll file a motion to dismiss. This lawsuit is baseless. But Joseph, you need to stay strong. They're pushing because they're desperate. That afternoon, I went for a walk. I needed air, needed to move, needed to think. I ended up at a small park near my apartment, sat on a bench, and watched people pass by. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by lawsuits and public shame. A woman sat down next to me, older, maybe in her 60s. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there feeding pigeons from a paper bag. After a while, she glanced at me. You look like you're carrying the world, she said. I let out a bitter laugh. Something like that. My husband used to say the heaviest weight isn't the load, it's wondering if you can carry it. I looked at her, she smiled gently. Once you decide you can, it gets lighter. She stood, tossed the rest of the breadcrumbs, and walked away. I sat there for a long time, her words circling in my head. That night, I went back to my apartment and pulled out the video my father had recorded. I watched it again, studied his face, listened to his voice. You stayed honest when they played games. I paused the video and stared at his frozen image. He'd known this would be hard. He'd known they'd come for me. But he'd trusted me anyway. I couldn't let him down. I opened my laptop, created a new document, and started writing. Not a legal brief, not a defense, just the truth, my truth. Everything that had happened, from my mother's death to Linda's arrival to this moment. I wrote for hours, barely stopping, letting everything pour out. When I finished, the sun was coming up. I read through it once, made a few edits, and saved it. Then I sent it to Parker. Use this however you think is best, I wrote. I'm done hiding. He called me an hour later. This is good, he said, really good. But if we make this public, there's no going back. They'll escalate. Are you sure you're ready? I thought about my father, about the key he'd given me, about the trust he'd placed in me when no one else would. I'm ready, I said. All right, Parker replied. Then let's finish this. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt resolve. The shift came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 weeks after the will reading. I was in my apartment, surviving on black coffee and determination, when my phone rang. It was Miles Abbott, the notary. Joseph, he said, his voice urgent, you need to come to my office, now. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. But I found something. Something your father left that changes everything. I was in my car within minutes. The drive into town felt longer than usual, every red light an eternity. My mind raced through possibilities. Another document? More evidence? I didn't know what to expect, but the tone in Miles's voice told me it was significant. When I arrived, Miles was waiting in his office, the door already open. He gestured for me to sit, then closed the door behind us. "I've been going through your father's safety deposit box," he began, "the one he kept separate from the estate documents. He left instructions that it should only be opened if Linda or Cole filed any legal action against you personally." My chest tightened. "They filed a lawsuit last week." "I know. That triggered the release." Miles pulled out a large manila envelope, thick with contents. "Your father wasn't just protecting you, Joseph. He was documenting everything." He opened the envelope and spread the contents across his desk. Financial records, bank statements, emails, photographs, all organized with dated tabs and handwritten notes in my father's distinctive script. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Miles pointed to a bank statement from 3 years ago. "This shows a transfer of $200,000 from Taylor Holdings to an account owned by Cole Freeman. The transfer was unauthorized. Your father discovered it during an internal audit." I stared at the numbers. "Cole embezzled from the company?" "Not just once." Miles pulled out another stack of documents. "Over the course of 4 years, Cole systematically moved money into shell accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger. Your father documented every single transaction." My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers. Each one showed another theft, another betrayal. Dates, amounts, account numbers, all meticulously recorded. "Why didn't he report it?" I asked. Miles pulled out a letter, handwritten, dated 18 months ago. "Read this," he said quietly. I unfolded the letter. My father's handwriting filled the page. "I discovered Cole's theft in May of last year. At first I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the pattern was too clear. I confronted him privately, gave him a chance to return the money and resign quietly. Instead, he denied everything and turned Linda against me. She accused me of targeting him out of favoritism for Joseph. That's when I knew. They weren't just taking my money, they were preparing to take everything. So I stopped confronting them. I started documenting every conversation, every transaction, every lie, because I knew that when I was gone, they'd come for Joseph, and I needed to give him the weapons to fight back." I set the letter down, my throat tight. Miles pulled out another document. "There's more. Your father hired a private investigator 6 months before he died. The investigator discovered that Linda had been in contact with a lawyer about challenging your father's mental competency. She was building a case to have him declared unfit so she could take control of his assets while he was still alive." "She what?" Miles showed me the report. "Phone records, email exchanges, meeting notes, all showing Linda's plan to have my father declared incompetent and herself appointed as his guardian." "She was going to lock him away," I whispered, "take everything while he was still alive." "Yes, but your father found out. That's when he created the secondary will and the video deposition. He knew he didn't have much time." I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. Everything I'd endured over the past month, the attacks, the lies, the public humiliation, it all made sense now. They weren't just fighting for money. They were fighting to bury the truth about what they'd done. Miles pulled out one final document, this one in a sealed envelope marked with my name. "He left this for you specifically," Miles said, "with instructions to give it to you only after you'd seen everything else." I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a short letter. "Joseph, if you're reading this, then you know what they are. I'm sorry I put you through this. I could have exposed them while I was alive, but I needed to know they'd reveal themselves completely. I needed you to see them for what they truly are, not what they pretended to be. You have everything you need now, not just to win, but to make sure they can never hurt anyone else. The choice is yours. You can use this to destroy them, or you can use it to protect yourself and move forward. Either way, I trust you to do what's right. You always have. I love you, son. I'm proud of you. I always was." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Miles watched me quietly. "What do you want to do with all this?" I looked at the evidence spread across the desk. Years of theft, conspiracy, betrayal. Enough to send Cole to prison. Enough to destroy Linda's reputation forever. "I want to talk to Parker," I said, "and then I want to end this." By that evening, Parker had reviewed everything. We sat in his office, the evidence organized into neat folders, a strategy forming. "This changes the entire case," Parker said. The embezzlement alone is enough to invalidate any claim Cole has to the estate. The conspiracy to declare your father incompetent shows clear intent to defraud. We can file criminal complaints, civil suits, everything. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. I just want them to stop. Parker leaned forward. Joseph, these people tried to erase you. They stole from your father, planned to imprison him, and when that didn't work, they spent the last month destroying your reputation. You have every right to pursue this fully. I know, but that's not who I am. Then what do you want? I thought about my father's letter, about the choice he'd given me. I want the truth on record, I said. I want the estate case closed in my favor. And I want them to know that I could destroy them, but I'm choosing not to. Because that's the difference between them and me. Parker studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll file everything with the court, present it as evidence in the estate case. Once the judge sees this, the secondary will stands and their lawsuit gets thrown out. But Joseph, once this is public, there's no taking it back. Their reputations will be destroyed, regardless of whether you press charges. They destroyed their own reputations, I said. I'm just showing people who they really are. The next morning, Parker filed the documents with the court. By afternoon, the news had leaked. Local reporters picked it up first. Estate heir presents evidence of embezzlement and conspiracy. Then the story spread. The same outlets that had vilified me suddenly wanted interviews, wanted my side, wanted to know how it felt to be vindicated. I ignored them all. Instead, I drove back to that overlook where my father and I used to sit. I parked in our spot, got out, and stood at the edge, looking out over the valley. My phone buzzed, a text from Parker. Judge reviewed the evidence. Emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. It's over, Joseph. You won. I read the message twice, then put my phone away. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. I did it, Dad, I whispered, just like you knew I would. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But I knew tomorrow would bring its own challenges, facing them in court, watching them realize they'd lost, deciding what came next. I stood there until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Then I drove home to prepare for the final battle. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread fast about the emergency hearing, and it seemed like everyone wanted to witness the conclusion of what had become a spectacle. Reporters lined the back rows, cameras ready despite the no-recording rule. Curious onlookers filled the remaining seats. The air hummed with anticipation. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Parker beside me. He'd organized everything into 3 thick binders, each tabbed and color-coded. The evidence of Cole's embezzlement, Linda's conspiracy documents, my father's meticulous records. Everything we needed laid out like a roadmap to the truth. Across the aisle, Linda and Cole sat with their legal team. 4 attorneys in expensive suits, the kind that cost more per hour than I used to make in a week. Linda wore black again, pearls at her throat, her expression carefully composed. Cole sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He hadn't looked at me once since entering the room. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Evelyn Thomas entered. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She'd presided over the initial will reading, and I could tell from her expression that she'd already reviewed the new evidence. She sat, arranged her papers, and looked out over the courtroom. We're here for an emergency hearing regarding the estate of Gregory Allen Taylor, she began. New evidence has been submitted that directly impacts the validity of claims made by the respondents. I've reviewed the materials, and I'll hear arguments from both sides before making my ruling. Parker stood. Your Honor, we've submitted comprehensive documentation showing systematic financial fraud, conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud, and willful misrepresentation of facts. This evidence was compiled by the deceased himself and left in a secured location with specific instructions for release. The judge nodded. I've seen the documents, Mr. Grant. They're quite thorough. She turned to the defense table. Does your side wish to respond? The lead attorney, a man named Ryan Robinson, stood slowly. He looked uncomfortable, which told me he'd seen the evidence too and knew what he was dealing with. Your Honor, he began carefully, we'd like to request time to review these materials more thoroughly before responding. They were only made available to us late yesterday, and... You've had 16 hours, Judge Thomas interrupted. That's sufficient time to review financial records and correspondence. Do you have a substantive response to the allegations or not? Ryan glanced back at Cole and Linda. Cole's face had gone pale. Linda's composure was cracking, her hands gripping the edge of the table. We dispute the characterization of these transactions, Ryan said weakly. There may be explanations that... Mr. Robinson, the judge said, her voice sharp, I've been practicing law for 35 years. I know what embezzlement looks like. These documents show unauthorized transfers totaling over $600,000 from Taylor Holdings to accounts controlled by Cole Freeman. The transfers were concealed through shell companies and falsified records. Is your client prepared to explain that? Ryan sat down. He leaned over and whispered something to Cole, who shook his head violently. The judge waited. Finally, Cole stood. His attorney tried to pull him back down, but Cole shook him off. Your Honor, Cole said, his voice tight. Those transfers were loans. Gregory approved them verbally. I was going to pay them back. Loans? The judge repeated flatly. Without documentation? Without interest agreements? Without any record of approval? He trusted me, Cole said. We had an understanding. Judge Thomas picked up one of the documents from her desk. According to the investigative report commissioned by Mr. Taylor 6 months before his death, he confronted you about these transfers. You denied they existed. Does that sound like an understanding? Cole's face flushed red. He was sick. He was confused. He didn't remember approving them. Convenient, the judge said coldly. She set the document down and turned to Linda. Mrs. Walker, you're named in several documents here as well. Specifically, correspondence with an attorney about having your husband declared mentally incompetent. Would you like to address that? Linda stood slowly, her composure finally shattering. I was concerned about his health. He wasn't thinking clearly. I was trying to protect him. Protect him, the judge repeated. By taking control of his assets? By isolating him from his son? By preparing guardianship papers while he was still fully competent? I didn't. Mrs. Walker, I have emails. I have phone records. I have meeting notes from your attorney outlining a strategy to have your husband committed to a care facility so you could assume power of attorney. Judge Thomas's voice was ice. That's not protection, that's exploitation. Linda sat down abruptly, her face crumbling. The judge turned back to Parker. Mr. Grant, does your client wish to make a statement? Parker looked at me. I nodded and stood. The courtroom fell silent. Your Honor, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I didn't want any of this. I didn't ask for the inheritance. I didn't ask to be put in the middle of a war. I just wanted to honor my father's wishes and move on with my life. I glanced at Linda and Cole. Neither would meet my eyes. But they didn't let me do that, I continued. They came after me with everything they had. They lied about me publicly. They destroyed my reputation. They tried to bury me so completely that even if I won legally, I'd lose everything else. I pulled out my father's final letter and held it up. My father knew this would happen. He knew what they were, and he gave me the tools to fight back. But he also gave me a choice. I could destroy them, or I could just tell the truth and walk away. I set the letter down. I'm choosing the truth. I want the estate settled according to my father's wishes. I want their lawsuit dismissed. And then I want to move forward. I don't want revenge. I just want peace. I sat down. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. Then, Judge Thomas spoke. I've seen a lot of estate cases in my career. Most of them are about money. This one is about character. She looked directly at Linda and Cole. You took advantage of a man's trust. You stole from him. You plotted against him. And when he protected his son, you tried to destroy that son's life. She picked up her gavel. The secondary testamentary document is hereby validated and entered as the controlling will. Joseph Taylor is recognized as the sole heir to the estate of Gregory Allen Taylor. All previous claims by Linda Walker and Cole Freeman are nullified. The gavel came down. Furthermore, the lawsuit filed by the respondents for emotional distress and defamation is dismissed with prejudice, and I'm referring the evidence of embezzlement to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Cole stood up, his face twisted with rage. This is bullshit. He manipulated. Mr. Freeman, the judge snapped, sit down before I hold you in contempt. Cole's attorney pulled him back into his seat. Judge Thomas turned to me. "Mr. Taylor, I'm sorry for what you've endured. Your father clearly loved you very much. I hope you'll honor his legacy well." "I will, Your Honor," I said quietly. She nodded, gathered her papers, and stood. "Court is adjourned." The gavel fell one final time, and it was over. The courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters rushed toward the exits to file their stories. People whispered and pointed. Parker shook my hand, a rare smile on his face. "You did it," he said. "It's finally over." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. The weight of the last month, the fear, the anger, the exhaustion, it all hit me at once. I sat back down, my legs suddenly weak. Linda and Cole filed out quickly, surrounded by their attorneys, refusing to answer questions from reporters. Linda was crying. Cole looked murderous. I watched them go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just emptiness. Parker placed a hand on my shoulder. "Take your time. We'll handle the paperwork." I sat there for a few more minutes, alone in the courtroom, listening to the echo of footsteps fade away. Then I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out into the afternoon light. Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting questions, thrusting microphones toward my face. I kept walking, head down, until I reached my car. I sat in the driver's seat and finally let myself breathe. My phone buzzed, messages from people I hadn't heard from in weeks, apologies, congratulations. Requests for interviews. I ignored them all. Instead, I drove back to that overlook one more time. I parked in our spot, got out, and stood at the edge. The valley stretched out below, quiet and endless. I pulled out my father's letter and read it again. "I trust you to do what's right. You always have." I folded it carefully and put it back in my pocket. "I hope I made you proud, Dad," I whispered. The wind carried my words away, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. 3 months passed before I truly understood what my father had left me. It wasn't the money, though, that had stabilized my life in ways I'd forgotten were possible. It wasn't the property, though walking through the estate without fear of being thrown out felt surreal. It wasn't even the vindication, though watching the news cycle shift from vilifying me to exposing Linda and Cole's crimes had brought a certain quiet relief. What my father left me was a choice about who I wanted to become. The criminal investigation into Cole's embezzlement moved forward quickly. The district attorney's office found the evidence overwhelming, and within 6 weeks, Cole was formally charged with wire fraud and embezzlement. He pleaded guilty as part of a deal that kept him out of prison but required full restitution and 5 years probation. His face appeared on the news, no longer confident and smug, but hollow and defeated. Linda faced no criminal charges, but her reputation disintegrated overnight. The conspiracy to have my father declared incompetent became public record, and the community that had once embraced her turned cold. She moved out of state within a month, leaving no forwarding address. I heard through Parker that she'd changed her name. I felt no satisfaction watching them fall. Just a strange, distant sadness for what could have been if they'd chosen differently. The estate settlement finalized on a cold morning in early November. Parker met me at his office with the final documents, everything signed and notarized, making it official. Taylor Holdings was mine. The property was mine. The accounts, the investments, the legacy my father had built over 40 years, all of it now carried my name. "How does it feel?" Parker asked as I signed the last page. I set down the pen and looked at him. "Heavy." He nodded, understanding. "Your father built something remarkable. The question now is what you'll do with it." I'd been thinking about that question every day since the hearing. That afternoon, I drove to the estate for the first time as its legal owner. The gates opened automatically as I approached, and I followed the winding driveway through gardens that were just beginning their winter dormancy. The house stood as it always had, imposing and beautiful, filled with history and ghosts. I parked and sat in my car for a moment, staring at the front entrance. So many memories lived inside those walls, some beautiful, some painful, all of them part of the story that had led me here. I got out and walked inside. The house was quiet, empty. The staff had been let go months ago during Linda's brief reign, and I hadn't yet decided whether to bring anyone back. For now, I wanted the silence, I wanted space to think without voices telling me what I should do or who I should become. I walked through the rooms slowly, running my hand along furniture my father had chosen, looking at paintings he'd collected, standing in doorways where I'd once stood as a young man watching him work. When I reached his study, I stopped. The room looked exactly as he'd left it, papers still stacked on the desk, books still lined the shelves. His reading glasses still rested on top of a leather-bound notebook. I sat in his chair and opened the notebook. Inside, I found pages of his handwriting, notes about business decisions, reflections on deals made and opportunities lost, and scattered throughout, observations about me. Joseph came by today. Didn't ask for anything. Just wanted to talk. He's so much like his mother. Quiet strength, always thinking 3 moves ahead but never saying it out loud. I worry I haven't told him enough how proud I am. I need to do better. The entry was dated 4 years ago. I flipped forward. Joseph doesn't know I've been watching his career. He thinks I'm too busy with Cole in the business. But I see everything. The way he treats people. The way he works without needing credit. The way he carries himself with dignity even when others overlook him. He's ready for this. I just need to make sure he gets the chance. That entry was from 2 years ago, right around the time my father started changing his estate plans. I closed the notebook, my throat tight. He'd been preparing me all along, not by giving me things, but by letting me prove who I was when no one was watching. I spent the next few weeks sorting through Taylor Holdings, understanding the scope of what I'd inherited. The company was larger than I'd realized, with divisions in manufacturing, real estate development, and technology investments. My father had built an empire quietly, without fanfare, focused on sustainable growth rather than flashy acquisitions. I met with the executive team, people who'd worked with my father for decades. They were cautious at first, uncertain about the young man who'd suddenly appeared as their new owner. But I listened more than I spoke, asked questions instead of giving orders, and slowly earned their respect. One executive, a woman named Hannah Clark, who'd been my father's CFO for 15 years, pulled me aside after a meeting. "Your father used to say that the best leaders are the ones who make others better," she said. "You remind me of him." "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," I admitted. "He wasn't either when he started," she replied, "but he figured it out. So will you." Her words stayed with me. By December, I had made my decision about what to do with the inheritance. I called a meeting with Parker, Hannah, and the head of the company's charitable foundation, a man named Anthony White, who'd worked with my father on community initiatives. "I want to transform how we operate," I told them. "Taylor Holdings has always been profitable, but I want it to be more than that. I want it to mean something." I laid out my vision. A significant portion of company profits redirected to scholarship funds for young people from struggling families. Partnerships with vocational schools to create apprenticeship programs. Investment in sustainable housing developments that prioritized affordability over maximum returns. "My father built this company with integrity," I said. "I want to build on that foundation but push it further. I want people to know that success and responsibility aren't mutually exclusive." Hannah smiled. "He would have loved this." Anthony nodded. "When do we start?" "Immediately." Over the next 3 months, we restructured. Some investors pushed back, concerned about reduced short-term profits. I bought them out. Some executives resisted the changes. I thanked them for their service and hired people who shared the vision. It wasn't easy. There were late nights and difficult decisions and moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But every time doubt crept in, I thought about my father's letter. "I trust you to do what's right." The first scholarship fund launched in March, offering full tuition support to 20 students who'd aged out of foster care. The applications poured in, hundreds of young people desperate for a chance to build better lives. Reading their stories, I saw myself, the ones overlooked, the ones counted out, the ones who just needed someone to believe in them. We selected the recipients carefully, not based on perfect grades or impressive resumes, but on character, resilience, and potential. At the award ceremony, I met each one personally, shook their hands, and told them the same thing. This isn't charity, this is investment. My father taught me that legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you build in others. Make us proud. One young woman, barely 18, looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" I thought about my father, about the key he'd given me, about the trust he'd placed in me when others saw only weakness. Because someone did it for me, I said, and now it's my turn to pass it forward. By summer, the programs had expanded. The apprenticeship initiative placed 50 young people in paid positions learning skilled trades. The affordable housing project broke ground on its first development, designed to create homes for families priced out of the market. Local news covered the initiatives, but this time, I didn't hide. I did interviews, explained the vision, and challenged other business leaders to think beyond profit margins. Wealth isn't the goal, I said in one interview. Impact is. My father understood that. He taught me that the measure of success isn't what you accumulate, it's what you enable others to achieve. The response was overwhelming. Other companies reached out, wanting to partner. Donors contributed to the scholarship fund. Young people sent letters thanking me for opportunities they'd never thought possible. But the moment that meant the most came on a quiet evening in June. I was at the estate, walking through the gardens as the sun set, when my phone rang. It was one of the scholarship recipients, a young man named Mackenzie Knight. "Mr. Taylor," he said, his voice excited. "I just wanted to tell you, I got accepted into the engineering program. Full ride. I start in the fall." "Mackenzie, that's incredible. Congratulations." "I wouldn't be here without you," he said. I wanted you to know that. You changed my life." After we hung up, I stood in the garden, surrounded by flowers my father had planted years ago, and finally felt the weight lift. This was the inheritance. Not money, not property. The ability to change lives. The responsibility to do better. The choice to build something that lasted beyond myself. I walked to my father's grave later that evening. It was marked with a simple headstone, elegant but understated, exactly as he would have wanted. I knelt beside it and placed my hand on the cold stone. "I get it now, Dad," I said quietly. "You didn't leave me an empire. You left me a purpose." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of summer rain. "I promise I won't waste it." I stood, brushed off my knees, and walked back toward the car. The sun had fully set now, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. As I drove away from the cemetery, I thought about Cole and Linda, about the choices they'd made and the prices they'd paid. I thought about the battle we'd fought and the scars it had left. But mostly I thought about the young people whose lives were changing because my father had trusted me with something precious. Legacy isn't what they leave you. It's what you do with it after they're gone. And I intended to make mine count. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.